My topic today is inclusion as a spiritual practice. I love talking about inclusion because it ties in so beautifully with who we are as UUs and who we strive to be, and because it is holy work, the work of building beloved community. There are several foundational ideas I'm going to introduce today, and I'll tie them all together at the end. The first is the idea of sacred emptiness. About 10 years ago, I had a mystical experience I did not want. I was meditating, seeking to empty my mind in the Buddhist way, and for a moment, for a millisecond, I succeeded. There was nothing but emptiness in me and around me, and then I got a message. I don't know how, because it wasn't a voice, it was just a knowing. And the message was, this is God, with a little g. This emptiness is God. I can tell you, I did not want this message. At that time, I had a very limited idea of what God could mean, and I was not interested. I'd been an atheist for years, and I was not ready to give that up. But I had just had this revelation. God is emptiness. And I was disturbed by this. It was the exact opposite of the God I had been taught as a child. And I resisted God for 40 years, and now it turns out that God is nothing. I went to our minister, who was Reverend Joy at the time, for spiritual counseling, but mostly to complain. Other people experience God as love, for instance. Why can't I have that? How can God be nothing? It took me years to understand that this message was actually not about God and God being nothing, but rather about emptiness, and emptiness not being nothing. I came to see it as a comforting reframing of emptiness, not as nothing, but rather as the place where creation happens. If you want to grow something new in your garden, you have to make space for it. If your garden is chock-a-block full, it's hard for anything new to grow there. It turns out emptiness isn't empty at all. It's full of possibility, because space is what allows something new to emerge. I also learned that there's a whole theology built around the idea of God as the process of creation happening constantly all over the universe, from galaxies to ecosystems to molecules. This creative process includes cultures, relationships, shared moments. In this view, creativity is a sacred power that is everywhere, including in us, and we express that sacred power in everything we do. We are creating something right here. This sacred power is everywhere, all of creation, including in us, and you can call that God or not, as you please. The main thing is that this creation requires space, what I've come to call sacred emptiness. Wayne Dyer said, "It has been said that it is the space between the bars that holds the tiger, and it is the silence between the notes that makes the music. It is out of the silence, or the gap, or that space between our thoughts that everything is created, including our own bliss." One practice I use to bring sacred emptiness into my daily life is how I come to a relational meeting with someone, especially someone I'm just meeting and getting to know. If I come to the meeting with a space between us filled with my thoughts, my feelings, my expectations, there is no room for you, let alone for the unfolding of our relationship in new and perhaps unpredictable ways. So I try to come to the meeting with a metaphorical empty bowl between us, a bowl of sacred emptiness, to receive the gift of your presence and for us to create something new together. Let's talk for a moment about our identities, because inclusion and identity are inseparable. I say that because belonging, which is the ultimate goal of inclusion, occurs when all of our identities are welcomed and cherished, and we are free to express them. We don't have to hide any part of ourselves. When we talk about inclusion, whether we're aware of it or not, we're picturing an in-group, which generally means people like us, and an out-group, people who differ from us in some important way. And the in-group is almost always a dominant group. White people wanting to include people of color, able-bodied people wanting to include people with disabilities, and so on. When we talk about inclusion, we're talking about making space for people who are not like us in some way, and specifically for people who, in their marginalized identities, are sometimes treated badly in our culture. So do we ignore that and expect them to fit in and be just like us? Or do we educate ourselves about their experience and our possible contributions to it, and in the process, make space for them to be themselves? You'll notice that when I say we, I'm speaking as a member of a dominant group, the group wanting to create inclusion. It's always important to know who the we is, because it's so easy to say we and think we're talking about everyone, when in fact we're only picturing people just like us. Disability activist Russell Lehman put it plainly and beautifully when he said, "Inclusion isn't about being invited to sit at someone else's table. It's about building a new table together where each person's voice and presence matter equally." The act of inviting often implies a subtle power dynamic, as if someone is granting permission to belong. But true belonging isn't something that can be granted. It's something that emerges naturally from a shared understanding and mutual respect, unquote. So here's a question for us and our church community. When we talk about inclusion, what do we mean? Do we mean come sit at our table? Or are we open to creating a new table together? And are we even aware of what our table looks like? What about our unspoken rules of etiquette, for instance? You may have realized by now that I'm speaking mainly to our dominant group identities, and that's because we, in our dominant group identities, are the ones who have the most power to open the space or keep it closed. I hope it's clear from last week that when I talk about a specific dominant group identity, being white, for instance, or able-bodied, and that's one of your identities, I am not stuffing you in a box and saying that's all that matters. We are all a fabulously rich, complex mixture of identities. It's just that in our dominant group identities, whether it's ability or skin color or gender or whatever, we have more than our fair share of power and advantage, and what we do with that matters. I also believe that if we're in a dominant group that is striving for inclusion, we are more likely to be successful if we approach it with humility. The idea of humility or humbleness is not especially popular in our hyper-individualistic culture today, because we're supposed to be strong, capable, independent, and the word humility can suggest being small or weak. I'm talking instead about a humility that comes from strength, from the knowledge of our own goodness and worthiness and interconnectedness, our inherent worth and dignity, if you will. And if you're not sure about any of this, let me say this clearly. Your worth and dignity are not up for debate. And as part of this community, you are loved. You are held in love. Let's go back to the emptiness for a minute. I believe that true inclusion requires sacred emptiness, making space for people who are different from us, and this requires humility from us in our dominant group identities. In our marginalized group identities, we don't need more humility because our oppressive culture wants us to think less of ourselves in those identities. But in our dominant group identities, there's room for humility, and I'm thinking of two specific things. There's the humility that says, there are important things that I don't know, that I need to learn. Things about the experiences of the people I want to invite into the sacred space, for instance, what their lives are like, how members of the dominant group interact with them in ways that are injurious or affirming, how my and our behavior fits in with that. There's also the humility that says, in this moment, I am not the most important person here. Now, I'm absolutely not saying always put yourself second. I believe that honoring ourselves and paying attention to our own needs is vital. What I am saying is that in those moments where we want to create sacred emptiness in the service of inclusion, having ourselves in the center of the bowl is unlikely to bring success. One of the things that can make this challenging is that in our dominant group personas, we're often not aware of how much space we take up. Not just physical space, but emotional, intellectual, cultural space. We have an expectation, perhaps completely unconscious, that things will be done our way, that they will be arranged to satisfy us, to keep us comfortable, to give us predictability. So the first thing is, we have to learn the ways that we're doing this, and then we have to be willing to not do it some of the time. It's about making the invisible visible and then making choices about it. We have to take our own needs, wishes, and expectations out of the center of the bowl. We're not throwing them away, we're just moving them out of the way for a while. This can be challenging work, and it is holy work. This isn't about blaming ourselves or anything, it's just about becoming aware, because awareness is the beginning of choice. And this is only the beginning. Making space is the first spiritual practice of inclusion and not the last. True inclusion will always ask more of us in the way that love always asks something of us. It will ask us to soften, to loosen our grip on familiar patterns, to release a little comfort or control so that others may bring their full selves into the circle. But that fuller conversation is for another day, otherwise this would have been a really long sermon. Today we begin with the first step, the spiritual practice of creating space, of emptying the bowl so that something new can come into being in it. So this is the spiritual practice I'm offering for today. It has 3 parts. The first part is to cultivate the knowledge, the awareness, the conviction of your own goodness, worthiness, and interconnectedness, and the fact that you matter and you are loved. Because from this place, we can be humble, we can be curious, we can be generous, and we are strong. From this place, we don't need to defend our good personhood if someone tells us we made a mistake, even if it's a racist mistake, because we know that we are good in our deep heart's core, to borrow a phrase from Yeats. Mistakes are surface things, and yes, they require a response, but they don't affect the core of goodness or worthiness or being held in love that is part of our birthright as sacred beings. So I'll say it again. Cultivate the knowledge, awareness, and conviction of your own goodness, worthiness, and interconnectedness, and the fact that you matter and you are loved. This is a place of power and grace. Next, practice recognizing when you're in one of your dominant group identities and learn what that means, how we impact members of the corresponding marginalized group, how we take up space, often without even realizing it. Last, when you've recognized a way that you're taking up space like this, occasionally practice humbly moving out of the center of that space, creating some sacred space, sacred emptiness, to make room for others to be themselves, so that together we can create a new and stronger community. Thank you.